about their careers, etc. We'll obviously be showing the sketches, etc. at the end, no matter what. So, but we want to make sure you get a panel on these no matter what. So, good afternoon. My name is Chris Conroy. I'm an editor at DC Comics. I work on Detective Comics, Wonder Woman, and a bunch of the other Batman family titles. And we have an amazing lineup of artists here for you today for our artist panel. First off, counting from me over, we have, frankly, the legendary John Romita Jr. Next to him, we have the artist of Batman, The Long Halloween, and a series of other amazing Batman stories, Tim Sale. And on the far end, we have the writer and occasional artist of a recently concluded Harley Quinn run, Amanda Connor. So in general, for this panel, we just like to talk to the artists about their careers and their process and all that sort of stuff. And they'll be sketching as they go. The theme for this one is going to be Batman family characters, so it can be anybody from the Batman family, including Batman. And we will probably just go ahead and get started with John. So John, I have to assume everybody here knows that you are the son of one of the, frankly, greatest comics artists of all time, John Romita.
Right in any way. Oh. I'm a little bit dull, as a matter of fact. I don't know how to work this damn pencil.
So, I mean, obviously you grew up in a house filled with comics. Were you a comics reader and fan from early childhood, or?
No, as a matter of fact, my father was a romance cartoonist, and I was, like most kids my age, I was not paying attention. He was just drawing people kissing all the time. And he would never sleep, so we would go to bed and he would be up in the attic and we'd see the little light in the attic. And every time I'm the one that had the screaming Mimi nightmares. I'd go up and see what he was doing. And one morning he was doing Daredevil. One night, I should say, it was 2 or 3 in the morning, whatever it was, and he was drawing Daredevil number 12, the cover. And I asked him what it was, and he explained to me that all the guys, it was actually the Plunderer, the Quasar was up in a tree, and he explained to me that this one guy in the middle is going to beat up all the bad guys. Yeah, right. Oh, and he's blind. So my father tells me that the top of my head exploded. I sat down and I wouldn't move, and I started asking him a million questions. And all the years he was drawing, I never asked him any questions until that cover. So that was the moment where I really became fascinated with comics. And he was so patient and explained everything to me, and I literally learned about the Daredevil character, superheroes, and blind people all in one session. That your senses are accelerated, the other senses to make up for the loss of one. And I was 8 years old, I think, or 7 years old at the time, and it stuck with me from then on. And he told me recently that he kept that cover all these years because I always said that was the moment that I was fascinated by the industry. And he's got that cover hidden somewhere in the house, and he won't tell me where it is.
Like hiding Christmas presents.
Yeah, exactly.
After that point, were you thinking seriously about becoming an artist, or when did that click in your brain?
He tells me that I drew regularly after that. And as I went through grade school and realized I couldn't sing or dance, it was time to come up with something. And that my grades were good enough to do what I wanted, but the art was always present in my house. And it just happened. And as I got a little bit better, it became a little bit, it's an immediate thing. If you do something well, somebody will say something good about it. So even though I wasn't that good, there was something that was improving slowly but surely. It just was embarrassing to have such a brilliant artist in the house, and I was so awful. It took forever and forever. And I still haven't gotten to the point yet that I could compare it to my father's work, because he's a brilliant artist in general, not just a cartoonist. I'm a cartoonist. And he did things when he was a teenager that I still can't do. And it's two things. It's great to see it, but it's also very intimidating. But it keeps your feet on the ground because you know there's always somebody better than you. So in 25 or 30 years, if he decides to pass, then I'll say I'm better than my father.
Was there ever a conversation with him where you're like, I think it's gonna be comic books for me? Or did it just sort of happen gradually?
He was doing it, and I said I want to do this when I was a young guy. And he said, no, you're not going to be a cartoonist. You'll be an artist, but you won't be a cartoonist. If you decide to be a cartoonist, you'll have been an artist first through education. So it was demanded upon me that I go to a major university and learn. And I did, and it lasted 2 years, and got a job after my second year of school, and dropped out, literally because I had work at Marvel. I still have to, he's telling me still to go back and finish my degree. Let's see.
Was your degree?
If I wait long enough, I won't have to worry about it.
Was your degree illustration? Or?
Advertising illustration.
Yeah. So what was your first Marvel gig? What was the first paycheck you got for
I worked literally for the British department, where they would take each issue, split it into two stories, and then you would come up with a cover and a splash page for the second. And it was printed here. It was distributed here. So I would do the sketches and then sometimes the covers and the new splash. And that was in 1976. 76. I was 3, by the way, in 76. And then the first American work I did was a 6-page Spider-Man mess. Chaos at the Coffee Bean, which is god-awful. Lions, a lot of bird cages. And then after doing that, by the grace of God, somebody said that it's decent, and they gave me a little bit more work. But I worked as an art consultant, they call it. I was washing floors and windows and taking out the trash. And they gave me a little bit of work, and I improved enough to get more and more work. And that was it. It took a long, long time.
And what was your first ongoing gig where you had a long stretch of issues in a row?
Iron Man was my first full-time gig. And let's see, Bill Mantlo was the writer, and Bob Layton was the inker. All in his words, he was my savior, he says. I always kick him in the ass for saying that. He claims credit for my career, by the way. Good old Bob.
How far into your career was that you finally landed an ongoing?
I think that was the first full-time book. I was 78, 77 or 78, something like that. And rest in peace, Dan Atkins was the artist that passed on. He literally passed away, and there was an opening. And I was lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time. That's it.
So day to day now, when you are working on a comic story, what is your process like when you get a script or a plot in hand? What's the first thing that you do with it?
I take notes. I write notes in the margins on the plot, what reference I'm going to need, what descriptions of the pages, the panels, literally go panel to panel to panel, and I make sure that it paces out to the right amount of pages. And if I come up short or if I come up long, I adjust it, and I'll add anything or everything to it, discuss it with the writer. So I do a lot of notes. They call it thumbnailing, but I don't do any illustrations until I go to the board. But I do a lot of notes and indications for myself, and also references. And then I go out, go to the computer and just print out as much reference as I can that's needed. And then I start immediately.
Start right onto the boards?
That's it, right on the boards. And I rough out 3 to 5 pages at a time, and then finish the artwork right there. And it's just a formula that I've worked on. But the storytelling is actually the most brain-worthy part of the job for me, because I want to make sure it comes out to make sense. I want to make sure it looks like a film, stop-action film. And my drafting is only okay, but the storytelling is more important to me, because I'm a better storyteller than I am an artist. There's guys like these people that really irritate the crap out of me how good they are. And so I make up for it with storytelling. I call it sleight of hand. Pay attention to the storytelling so you don't see how bad the artwork is over here. But the storytelling, if somebody reads a book and says, that was a great story, really enjoyed the story, and they don't say, I really enjoyed the artwork first, that means I've done the right thing. Because it's not important. It really isn't the most important part. It's the artwork. It's not the most important. It's the story. And it helps out that I can tell a story. I can do it. And I enjoy doing it more so than the artwork, to tell you the truth.
I mean, for those of you who aren't familiar, there's widely considered to be 2 different ways of writing a comic book story, which is the plot style, which is often called Marvel style, in which a writer will provide, it can be honestly as few as a few paragraphs to a few pages of description of the events of the story, what the action will be, what the interactions are.
Ironically, it's the Marvel way is no longer the Marvel way. DC is now allowing us, this is great, that allowing us to have the artist be more intrinsic to this. Whereas Marvel, a couple of years ago, some moron, I would like to give you his name, but I won't. His initials are AA. Said that artists are interchangeable, they're not the most important part. And that the irony is that his job didn't last long after that, because the sales of their books have declined. Whereas DC allows the artists to be important to the process. So they give us plots now. And it's just, it's a complete reversal. Whereas DC was all about scripts way back when. I was lucky enough, and I believe Tim was lucky enough to start off working on plots. We didn't get scripts per se, and it was all about us learning how to tell stories first, and then the writer would write the dialogue according to the artwork. And I think that really allowed me to learn storytelling. Well, first my father helped out when I was younger, but a lot of the editors-in-chiefs at Marvel were insistent upon storytelling. Establish and make sure you know where you are, tell the story, and that really, that's how I cut my teeth on storytelling. I was working at Marvel at that time. Now it allows me to be able to, you said 3 pages, I have a 65-page first issue of the Superman Year One trilogy, 200 pages of artwork. Frank gave me 3 typewritten pages of plot for 65 pages of artwork. And it sounds intimidating, but it actually, I could have done 165. There's so much in there, and there's so much room to play, and I love doing that more so than anything else. I would prefer this way. Not everybody enjoys it as much as I do, but that's the way I prefer it. So this is no longer the Marvel way, this is the way, and I prefer that.
In a case like something with that Frank plot where you're expanding by so much, can you walk us through some of the decisions that you're making as you go through that? Is it as simple as you see that characters have an arc going? Are you even generating a scene for them to play out?
But I'll make sure I speak to Frank about it first. He gives me the plot, and it'll say something to the effect of the baby lands, and but it's through for instance, the beginning of the first issue, it's not a retelling of the origin per se, it's his expansion on the origin. Because instead of just having the baby land and then he grows and becomes Superboy, it's the long process of him growing up as a struggling adolescent. But the first couple of scenes, he mentions the term through the eyes of the baby. I don't know if he meant that literally or not, but I took it as literally. So the first several pages, as the destruction of Krypton's going on, is only through the eyes of the baby, being moved around and put into a rocket and taking off. You don't see the baby's face until you see the reflection in the glass of the rocket. But the whole of Krypton explodes in front of the baby, and his parents are disintegrated. So it expands. It was the first 10 pages until he lands on Earth, and I had more fun with that than I would have thought, than I could have imagined. And it was only one line. I got 10 pages out of one line, and that's the kind of thing. And I made sure I discussed it with Frank and the editors first. Yeah, go ahead, that's fun. And it's fine, and it worked out that way. And every time Frank would give me a line that was so weighted in story possibilities, all I had to do was call up and make sure that it was okay with what I had planned. And here we are. And it gets to the point where Clark Kent enlists in the Navy because on Krypton there was water. And he lands in Kansas, and there's no water in Kansas. So he has dreams about the oceans on Krypton. He decides he wants to be near water again, so he enlists in the Navy. Because he's a physical specimen, he's a Superman, he's recruited into the SEALs. And that's the kind of expansion. So there are about 25 pages of him going through basic training. But it's not 25 boring pages, it's a lot of fun. I had more fun with that than I could have imagined. And that's the kind of thing we do. We expand on little moments. A small indication of a vignette can blow into several pages, 10, 20 pages. And then he ends up in Atlantis. And I can't say, I'm already giving away too much. You didn't hear any of this shit from me, by the way. I think I gave up too much. But there's 200 pages of story coming up. And before he actually appears in costume, there's about 100 pages of artwork, and there's nothing in that is boring. Trust me, you'll have to just believe me. So it's a 200-page graphic novel, 3 65-page issues, and I'm halfway through the second issue, so I'm halfway through.
And that is, I mean, what you were describing is probably the highest level of collaboration between writer and artist that you can get to. Certainly in the
working with Frank tends to bring that out in somebody. Yep. That's Frank Miller for you.
Yep. So, all right, we're probably going to switch artists, but real quick before we do so, did you manage to get that mechanical pencil working at all?
Yep, somebody fixed the pencil for me, yes.
Before we switch over...
Never said I was intelligent, just really good looking.
Could you do a quick rough for the camera of sort of what your first stage on a board would be for a figure?
Well, better lighting is one. I learned this from John Romita. I take a mechanical pencil with a 2H lead, and I use the side of it, and I rough things out. So this is a little bit different, but I just start with a rough, and then I finish the artwork. Where'd you go? All right. You run over on the side of my hand. Oh, that's light. There's a joke. When Michelangelo said, I don't know if Michelangelo actually ever said it, but somebody asked him how he sculpted. He says, I just knock away everything that doesn't look like the subject. I don't know if it's true or not, but he's Sicilian and he's a wise ass. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw everything that isn't the negative space on the paper. All right, it's not that great a joke.
While you're sketching away for the camera, Amanda, I think you kind of pause and chat for a bit if your microphone's on. So what was your first introduction to comics?
Oh my God. I don't know, because I've had comics for as long as I can remember. My dad was really into comics, and he wanted to be a comic book artist when he was young. And back in the 1950s, when you announced to your parents that you wanted to be a comic artist, they talked you out of it. And that's what my granny, nan, and grandpa did. They talked him out of it. And so he went into advertising, and eventually, you know, I think the memory of my first comic is when, you know, when one of my baby teeth fell out and I stuck the tooth under my pillow, and the tooth fairy left me a Mad magazine and a nickel. So that's my first memory of an actual issue of a comic book. But I remember every time I got sick, you know, and had to stay home from school, my mom would be like, I don't want to deal with this kid, so let me get a stack of comics and, you know, and keep her quiet for at least, you know, 6 hours. So that I've always had comics, you know, they've just always been around in my family. So yeah.
And now you're married to a comic.
Yes. Yeah.
And what was sort of the process of professionalizing like for you? Did you do a formal education for art school?
I did. I went to the Kubert School, the Joe Kubert School in New Jersey, in the tri-state area, and it worked out well because I didn't have to travel very far. I lived in Connecticut at the time, and New Jersey, the Kubert School in New Jersey was an hour and a half away, so, you know, on holidays I could come home pretty easily, and just, you know, I didn't have to like travel like from California or anything like that. So yeah, that was my professional comic training. I think a huge chunk of my training though just came from watching my mom and dad, because you know, every once in a while my dad would create a job for himself where he would have to draw in a comic style, and I would just watch him do that. And my mom was always painting and always illustrating, and I would watch her all the time. And it helped to always have art supplies all over the house. And I clearly remember my dad, you know, marching into my room going, where are all my markers? So I was always, you know, making off with his art supplies, and he could never find them. So that, I think that was the beginning of my formal training, was just watching my parents. So, or maybe that's informal training. But yeah, and it helped, you know, just hanging out and watching them all the time.
What would you say was your breaking in? What were your first paid gigs?
My very first, it took me a while to actually get my foot in the door. I kept, going. I went back and forth to Marvel in DC, I think maybe 5 or 6 times before I got my first job. And I was also working as an assistant to Bill Sienkiewicz at the time. So that was interesting.
What kind of work did Bill have as assistants doing?
Basically, I was picking up after him. Because Bill's incredible. He's all about the process. Once the art is finished, he just no longer cares. And he was doing Elektra Assassin at the time. And I got to model for him a little bit too, because the previous Halloween I had dressed up as Elektra, and I had photos, and he's like, you wanna pose, like do poses for me? I'm like, yeah. So if you look at Elektra Assassin issues 1 through 4, she looks like this tall, formidable Greek girl with long black hair, and by the end it's like me in a red bandana going, hi, so it doesn't look like Elektra anymore. But I remember walking into his studio one morning, and there was a beautiful Elektra Assassin page on the easel that was like almost done, and then there was a finished one on the floor with a sneaker print on it. So he just once he finished, he no longer cared. So, but he kept saying, yeah, go into Marvel in DC. They're letting everybody in now, and I'm like, okay, cool. So my first job was Solo Avengers number 12. I got to do a Yellow Jacket story. It was the female Yellow Jacket from the late 80s. And I was so lucky I got Stan Drake to ink over me. That made me, I think that's the reason I got more work, because everybody thought, hey, she draws like Stan Drake. So yeah, that was my foot in the door job. So it was great.
Well, you both write and draw now fairly regularly.
Yeah.
What's your workday like in terms of separating those processes? How do you approach it?
So I have writing days and I have drawing days. I can't really overlap them easily. Like I have to sort of get my brain in a different headset. When I was drawing and writing, when we were working on the Watchmen books, I would draw. I would lay out the page and do writing notes on the sides of the layouts. So I could remember, all right, this is what I want it to be. I would actually write while I was drawing, and then add a little bit of dialogue around the margins. So if I'm writing and drawing, it's completely different for me than if I'm just writing or just drawing. So it's hard for me to write. I'm so used to drawing. Writing is difficult for me.
You also tend to be, I think, a bit of a night owl, if I recall.
I am.
With you,
We're all night owls.
Yeah.
None of us sleep.
Yeah. I think that's the bane of being an artist, is that you just your brain my brain starts getting really, the wheels get greased at around 10 p.m. and I just go really well. My best hours are 10 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Am I the only one who has friends or family that call and act like you don't have a job? Can you go pick this up for me, by the way?
Yeah.
Go pick up my dry cleaning.
Oh, you're not working. It's like when you work from home, people think you're not working. So yeah, I can't do that right now. I have to finish. I have a deadline. So yeah, it's difficult to try and tell people, no, I gotta really work. So, but yeah, night owls. It's funny because when Jimmy was inking, he used to be a night owl, and now that he's a writer, he gets up really early. So I think your brain just goes a different way.
I get up early.
You're not? Yeah, everybody's different. My dad used to be a night owl and my mom was an early bird, and now that they're retired, they both just stay in bed and read the paper.
So Tim, do you kind of try to keep 9 to 5-ish hours? Or?
No, I'm not. I'm pretty disciplined, but I'm not like that, no. And one of the advantages that I've always thought is that you can make up your own weekend or your own days off, but you've got to be disciplined in order to do that, because you can't just do whatever you want. You have to, there's certain hours in a week, that kind of thing. Or really certain amount of pages in a week, that kind of thing.
So what were your formative comics experiences? What was the first time you encountered comics?
Well, when I was 6, we moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, from Amherst, Massachusetts to Seattle. And it took a pretty leisurely time, about 3 weeks to get across. I was 6, my sister was 3, mom and dad. And I was beginning to learn how to read. I wasn't a genius like this one over here, but I learned how to read from reading comics, and Dad bought comics for me to amuse me just in the car where we had nothing to do otherwise. And it was funny, years later, probably when I was about 13, I found I was really starting to get into comics, and I was a real Marvel zombie. Just because I thought the art was a lot better. It wasn't anything else about it. This is like mid-60s, you know, so, and yes, that changed.
Right
I
around
owe
when
my career to DC, really, you know, so it's not about that. But at that point, that's what really got me in, and it was your dad, Steranko, Buscema, yeah, all that stuff. I'm just looking through a comic rack, and there's I don't know what they were calling them, but it was mostly reprints in a double-sized book. And they reprinted Spider-Man Annual #2. And I started flipping through it. And I realized that I'd read that when I was 6. It was intensely nostalgic all the way. And it took me a while why is this affecting me like this? So that was my first experience with stuff. And it was really about 12 or 13 where I just suddenly started getting fanatical about it.
And then did that continue right through in your education? Did you do
No.
a formal art education, or did you
I
kind
mean,
of walk out with comics
I
for a
kept
while?
drawing, and somewhat like what John was saying, you know, it's all terrible, but people were encouraging. And one of the things is like writing music, or writing. Starting with a blank page, and people find it magic that you can do something with it, or you just pluck music out of the air, you know, that kind of thing. And so that was always encouraging, and I always wanted to do it. I was reading comics and collecting comics, not in the way people do now, but just a stack of things. I ended up doing 2 years at the University of Washington Art School, mostly life drawing, which taught me an awful lot. And John Buscema was advertising in the back of Marvel Comics his workshop. I graduated high school in 74, so in 76, I got into the workshop, and there was Buscema, your dad, and Marie Severin. And it was funny when you mentioned 1976 in your tale. Immediately, it was really cool, really cool. And Buscema did anatomy, and your dad did inking mostly, and storytelling. And Severin did covers and also storytelling. And I was pretty confident I knew I could draw pretty well, especially because of my college life drawing. I'd never done life drawing before. And working big was a real eye-opener for me. And so I unfortunately came back from New York to Seattle thinking I just don't know how to tell a story. Because I would get, like on covers, that'd be fine. But no, that panel, I don't know where I'm going. It was, and I came away thinking, oh, I'm just going to try to be an inker or something like that, right? And my first job in comics, about 10 years later, was inking. But during that time, and I was almost 30 at this point, turned out, and the more I was reading comics, and especially this is in the 80s now, and the black and white boom, where people were really experimental with stuff. Cerebus actually was a real instrumental book for me, both in encouraging that. I mean, Dave Sim wrote, penciled, inked, lettered a book pretty much a month for the first maybe 40 issues of that. And that really, suddenly I kind of figured it out. And one of the things that, I was still, the drawing was crude and everything. It took another 10 years of slogging away for that to get better. But I don't know what happened in the meantime, but it was just growing up, probably part of it, and continuing to read and be a fan and that kind of stuff. And I'd always been told you ought to be able to, probably your dad told me this, told us this, you ought to be able to follow it without any words, just on a basic level. If you're gonna,
That's what Joe Kubert told me.
yeah, well,
Yeah. Make it so that you can read it without any.
yeah, and also
Yeah.
establishing things like if Superman is going to jump out a window, show the window earlier in the scene and all that kind of stuff. And so when I started working with Jeff had never written a comic before. He was a movie and TV guy, and he had to learn stuff like that. But he'd heard that also. We're about the same age. I'm 62. He's 61, I think. And that, again, that was a learning experience. We started out really experimental because that's what Jeff wanted to do, but eventually we windowed it down to basic storytelling.
I have a question because we're roughly the same age. We're all the same age. When you were in college, university, did you have instructors that were kind of looking down their nose at you as being wanting to be an illustrator as opposed to a fine artist? Because I got
No. But I didn't know that I don't know if we had that discussion. It wasn't, because it wasn't a professional, it was just life, it was just drawing classes.
All right, I'm
things
sorry.
like that.
But, so you had professors that were just illustrators as well? No, as opposed to...
No, they were fine artists.
I got treated like the stepchild, the redheaded stepchild, for lack of a better expression.
Right.
Because the professors, they nicknamed me derisively Rockwell, because everybody else was a fine painter. Everybody was doing the bleeding eyes and the beautiful, heavy, important. Remember, I was in college in 74 and on, and the guys that were my professors were, what's the expression, hippies from the 60s. And if you were an artist and you were going to be an artist, being a cartoonist was like being a soap opera actor compared to a Shakespearean actor. So they were constantly chuckling at me because I didn't want to do these deep-rooted, meaningful images. I wanted to just be an illustrator. So I got nicknamed Rockwell and told, Romita, smoke a joint, you're a pain in the ass, you're just too tight. And that's what I got, that was my advice from my painting professor.
Well,
Thank you very much for that advice.
Yeah, I took painting once, and I don't even remember if I finished the course. I may have just dropped out. I did some, I'm sure, terrible paintings, and yeah, I was chuckles in the back of the room when you put your stuff up for critiques and stuff. But outside of that, and also I learned I was colorblind during that experience. Yeah.
Oh my God, I never knew that.
Yeah, me and Toth and John Byrne. So that was kind of freeing, actually. And one of the wonderful things about comics is that you can make a living working in black and white and never having to color.
Wait a minute, you were instructed in painting courses and you didn't realize you were colorblind until you took the course?
Until I did it, yeah.
That's incredible. Pardon me for I never heard that story about Toth or Byrne either.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it may be, I mean, Toth is a huge influence on my work, and I wonder how much of that is just working with shape as opposed to noodling, and especially working with a lot of black.
And
He's one of the great minimalist.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who Alex Toth is or was, right?
Yeah. If not, find a book out there.
Brilliant. Not a very pleasant man, but a very brilliant artist.
That's true.
We are running a long time, so I want to do kind of one question for each person, and then we will actually be giving away the sketches.
Italian food.
So-
That's the answer.
It's honestly just your answer to a very basic question that probably a lot of people have in mind, which is what is your number one piece of advice for somebody who is doing art and looking to pursue it in comics? Tim actually already mentioned mine as an editor, and it's the thing that I say the most in portfolio review sessions, which is life drawing. Don't stop doing life drawing, even if you are professional, even if you are working. Go to the classes every once in a while. Never stop working on every possible angle of the figure.
Advice. If you're an artist, it's like being a musician. The more you practice, the better you get. That's all there is to it. You can't teach anybody how to be an artist. You can teach somebody how to learn how to be an artist. And the only thing I can think of is if you draw every day, it's like if you play the piano every day, eventually you're going to be brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm working on it, but you can't stop practicing. It's just what you do. And especially art, and especially music, you will get better and better and better the longer you, and get rid of your ego. There's always somebody better. There's always somebody better, smarter, better looking. Just get used to it, and you will get better if you don't have a gigantic ego. That's all I can think of.
Yeah. Excuse me. The number changes, but let's say what the cliche is, everybody has 500 bad pages in them before their first good one. Sometimes it's 200, sometimes it's whatever. But that's okay. The faster you get, either that discourages you, or it encourages you to get through those 500 before you can get going. I know I had at least that much. So,
About like 10,000. You made me look good. I think I don't know what to tell you if you want to be an illustrator, but if you want to be a comic artist, learn the storytelling and learn how to do interiors. Because I see a lot of people who come up and they want to show me drawings, and I see these beautiful illustrations, but I don't always see a lot of storytelling, like panel storytelling, sequential storytelling. And I think there's a need for that, and you don't have to, and it used to be when I first got into comics, I had a little bit more of an animated style. And they were telling me, it's a little too animated, can you sort of make it more superhero-y? And I would just try and bend myself to that. And then like Darwin Cook came along and pissed me off so much, because then he had this really animated style, they got all this work, and I'm like, seriously? First time. I love those guys, but I was just like, I used to kind of do that.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I'm always asked, like, is it my style? Is my style what's
right? And it was, because they were happy with my storytelling, but it was my style. But now you can have a million different styles, which is great, So really, you want to eventually develop a confidence in your style, no matter what it is. But you also want to learn how to do sequential storytelling. I think that's really important, and be persistent too. It's really easy to get discouraged. Not as much as it used to be, because now people are sort of like, yeah, go ahead and be an artist. But back when I was a kid, in school, people were like, you want to what? In fact, it was the opposite. My parents were encouraging me to do it. And like some people I knew were just like, I don't know, you're gonna star comic books, really? So, but yeah, like don't get discouraged and learn sequential storytelling.
I think there's a really interesting note about interiors too, because people don't pay that much attention to it. But and one of the things that I have a lot of fun. What should be on that desk? Who's this person? Who's the person at the desk? And then you can figure out what goes on the desk, that kind of thing. And so storytelling. And here's the other thing about, you were talking about it, and you were talking about it. I never got much shit for wanting to do comics. A good deal, and pretty much every time I mention it now, people go, really? It used to be the standard reaction was there are people that do those things. So
Make a living doing that?
You get money?
no, people always thought it was fun.
And we've run out the clock pretty heavily, so lightning round here. We are going to give away the sketches the artists have done, but I'm going to test you. You thought you were out of school on a Saturday.